Imagine a single mistake that could erase the future of the world. Now imagine living with that anxiety for 370 days. No horizon to measure by, no mail, no news, only the constant rhythm of breath and the slow calculus of survival. What really happened during those 370 days inside Noah's Ark was more than an ocean crossing. It was the operation of a fragile, closed system where every small failure risked cascading into catastrophe. The Ark was not merely a vessel, it was a survival system, wood and compartments, 8 human lives at its helm, and animals contained in a world deliberately limited and intensely managed. For 1 year and a few weeks the fate of life depended on order inside, not safety outside. If that thought makes you uneasy, stay with me. This is where the real lessons live. If this is speaking to you, like and subscribe for more explorations that connect ancient stories to practical life. Step inside, mentally, and listen. The first thing you hear is not silence. There is a continuous noise, a background hum. Rain on wood, timbers creaking under weight, water lapping against the hull. Then there are the living sounds, muffled calls, the shuffle of feet on planks, the occasional lowing or chirp that travels through slats and rafters. Smells mix and linger. Damp wood, packed hay, the sharpness of animal breath. Heat builds where fur and feathers cluster, and the air can quickly move from cool and wet to heavy and close. These are not abstract details. They are the anatomy of a constrained environment. In any closed system, what matters most is what happens inside. External protection is meaningless if the interior collapses. That was the Ark's central risk, sustaining a livable interior climate and order long enough for the waters to recede. The Ark's structure, as the story suggests, functioned to reduce internal risk. Compartmentalization appears as a practical response to a simple truth. Contained animals are less likely to injure each other. Reduced movement means less rapid consumption of resources. Separation allows for targeted care and easier identification of problems. Imagine rows of stalls or partitions, wooden dividers that kept animals physically apart while still allowing caretakers to tend them. This is not a modern floor plan, it is a prudent inference from the account that animals were kept, fed and managed within a single structure. The implication for us is clear. When pressure is high, creating internal boundaries stabilizes the whole. A single injured animal, uncontrolled, could trigger a chain reaction, panic, trampling, fights. A single unchecked behavioral outbreak in a small system threatens the entire venture. From conflict risk, we move to the most constant grinding challenge: food. The text emphasizes that provisions were taken aboard, which changes everything. Food already on hand shifts the problem from hunting or foraging to storage, spoilage, and distribution. Canned ideas about logistics break down. Spoilage is the enemy. In a humid environment, wet feed molds, stored grain heats and sours, meat, if present, demands preservation. The simplest operational principle emerges: plan for simplicity and repeatability. Routines for feeding, clear allotments, and predictable distribution are preferable to daily improvisation. If each day requires heroic effort to decide who eats what, fatigue will erode discipline. So the Ark likely relied on prepared stores and a disciplined schedule, measured rations, rotating supplies, feeding cycles that minimized waste and prevented hoarding or conflict. The leadership's role here is practical: to decide and enforce the feeding plan, to rotate stores before spoilage, and to keep distribution transparent so trust remains intact. Waste management and air quality form the invisible, relentless tasks of such a containment. With many animals in one building, waste accumulates quickly. Urine and feces break down into ammonia and other gases that irritate eyes and lungs, and organic decay brings disease vectors. The Ark's narrative gives us hints of practical, low-technology measures: compartmental separation, routine cleaning, and the use of gravity and simple architecture to move waste away. Places to store soiled bedding, scheduled removal, and spaces where waste could be kept dry or contained would all be prudential moves consistent with the account. Ventilation matters here in two ways: removing contaminated air and moderating heat and humidity. The story indicates a top opening of some form, an upper aperture that allows air to escape and cooler air to enter by convection. When warm, moist air rises through an opening, fresh air can be drawn in below, creating a passive flow. It is proper to say we do not know the mechanics. It is equally reasonable to infer that the Ark's design included ways to let it breathe. For us, the spiritual parallel is immediate. What we do not clear out will accumulate. Neglected messes become toxic, not only physically but morally and relationally. Animal behavior under confinement is a study in stress management. Animals, removed from their natural territories, react in predictable ways. Some withdraw and conserve, others become agitated or aggressive. Keeping different kinds apart reduces interspecies predation and prevents competition for space. But even among the same kind, stress leads to illness and difficulty breeding or maintaining calm. The Ark's caretaking likely involved calm routines, predictable feeding times, quiet handling, and a low-stimulus environment to discourage hyperactivity. Animals that came to Noah suggest a movement that was more ordered than frantic capture. The picture is of creatures present and attended to, rather than running loose. The implication for leadership is to create predictability. When everything has its time and place, tension falls. In any confined group, family, team, congregation, predictable rhythms reduce anxiety and lower the chance of destructive outbreaks. Heat and humidity are subtle threats that compound with time. Bodies generate warmth, stored feed ferments and warms. Dampness from endless rain soaks into fibers and nooks. Over weeks, the equilibrium between heat and moisture shifts, producing conditions ideal for mold and disease. The Ark, exposed to continuous rain and sealed from the outside, would need to manage thermal balance. Again, simple architecture helps: layered bedding, airflow through upper openings, and separation of feed storage from sleeping areas. Even low-tech measures, rotating bedding, airing out compartments when possible, keeping damp materials off floors, are the kinds of common-sense steps that could be inferred from a narrative that shows survival rather than collapse. Spiritually, this is a metaphor for internal climate. Our habits, the relationships we allow, the resentments and small compromises. Heat left unchecked becomes feverish. Humidity left unchecked rots foundations. Human factors, routine, leadership, discipline, and the slow erosion of morale may be the most decisive element. 8 people aboard carried the responsibility for every life and every system. They were the managers, laborers, medics, cooks, and the spiritual center. Noah's role, as the one who walked with God, carried both the authority to order the work and the burden of making many small routine decisions day after day. Leadership in such a confined system is not primarily charismatic speeches or occasional gestures. It is the steady enforcement of rules, the willingness to get up early and do the unglamorous tasks, the patience to repeat instructions, and the courage to be consistent when everyone else is exhausted. A schedule would have been a lifeline. Shifts for feeding, cleaning, tending the animals, and maintaining stores. Rest plans would prevent burnout. And when crises arose, an injured animal, a leak, an outbreak of disease, decision rules and a chain of command would limit indecision. The text frames Noah as both servant and steward, his obedience to the divine command translated into organizational discipline. That teaches us a quiet but urgent truth. Surviving a prolonged trial requires leadership that prioritizes method over heroism. There is a psychological dimension that is easy to overlook. Time itself became an enemy. For 370 days, the usual markers of human life, sunrise, market, social life, communal worship in familiar places, were replaced by a loop of maintenance tasks and waiting. Living without deadlines or visible progress creates two dangers: resignation and panic. Resignation is the slow decay of motivation. Panic is episodic disaster, rash choices that break the system. The Ark's countermeasure appears to have been rhythm. Steady work, small victories, daily routines that produce a sense of accomplishment and competence. The family aboard could mark time in tasks completed, amount of bedding changed, stalls cleaned, days of rations used. Leadership likely used ritual and memory to preserve hope, prayers, naming of births, small acts of recognition. For anyone leading through prolonged crises today, the lesson is to build micro-rituals that make time legible and to measure success in things that can be controlled. Medical risk, quietly present throughout, must be acknowledged without pretending to have ancient veterinary manuals. With many species in proximity, infection can spread. Minor wounds become entry points. Contaminated water or food breeds illness. The prudent inferences are simple: triage the sick, isolate contagious individuals, and maintain cleanliness where possible. Isolation in the Ark's compartment served not only to reduce conflict, but to manage disease risk. The biblical account does not go into veterinary detail, but the survival outcome indicates effective measures were taken, whether by divine protection, human diligence, or both. The balance here is sobering. Responsibility does not negate dependence. Management does not remove the need for faith. As the waters receded and the world shifted from peril to possibility, the Ark's final decisive act was measured and cautious. The raven sent out first did not return as the dove eventually did. These tests were probes, not gambles. The raven, which scavenges and flies further, could discover open ground, but does not signify a gentle, inhabitable landscape fit for reoccupation. The dove's return with an olive leaf later signaled a more specific change: emergence of vegetation, a sign of a livable environment. This sequence, kept intact by the text, reveals the wisdom of testing the outside before dismantling the inside. Exit was not a rush to freedom, but a strategic reconnaissance followed by patient confirmation. The spiritual application is powerful. When the chaos recedes and a new horizon appears, the first move is not to sprint back into former life, but to test, to scout, to ensure the ground will sustain the future we intend to build. There is another layer to that final testing: restraint. On a human level, the temptation after a long confinement is to act impulsively, disband routines, abandon accountability, lapse into old excesses. The Ark story shows discipline to the end. Animals were not released en masse. People disembarked only when the signs were clear. That restraint kept the new beginning from being sabotaged by haste. For leaders today, the invitation is to steward transitions with the same measured care. Test the environment, preserve boundaries until they are no longer needed, and let renewal be gradual and intentional. Throughout these systems, the compartments, the feeding schedules, the cleaning, the ventilation, the leadership, one theme recurs: internal order under pressure. The Ark's success depended less on the miracle of a closed vessel and more on the daily, invisible work of management, the steady obedience to task, and the restraint to wait for proof. Yet we must not reduce the biblical account to mere managerial lesson. The narrative preserves divine agency. God closes the door, sets the mission, and acts in the timeline. Human responsibility and divine sovereignty are held together. Where God provides, human hands work. Where God commands, humans implement. That tension is essential. It prevents the story from becoming a secular blueprint and keeps it reverent and theological while still offering practical insight. What does this mean for us, living in different kinds of arcs today? Crises take many forms: a family shuttered by illness, an organization isolated by scandal, a season of unemployment, a personal battle with addiction, a congregation facing societal upheaval. Any situation that narrows our world and forces us to live in a contained environment can be analyzed with the Ark's lessons. Start with compartments, set boundaries that protect what must survive. Make simple, repeatable routines for essentials, food, sleep, work, so that decision fatigue does not erode discipline. Pay attention to waste, physical, relational, and emotional, and create ways to remove it. Guard the air, our internal climate, by creating spaces for confession, rest, and clarity. Lead with patience and steady decisions, not with episodic heroics. And when the danger passes, test before you leap. Transition is a fragile art. Some practical examples. A leader of a small non-profit in crisis might create task teams with clear responsibilities, communications, donor care, operations, so that the whole does not collapse when pressure intensifies. A family weathering prolonged illness might establish a feeding and medicine schedule, rotate caregiving shifts, and set a weekly check-in to note what is working and what is failing. An individual wrestling with anxiety might compartmentalize triggers, schedule short daily practices for rest and clarity, and isolate behaviors that compound stress. These applications are not mystical. They are an invitation to disciplined living modeled on an ancient, sober example. Return finally to the image that began us. For 370 days, the future of life on Earth was entrusted to a small system kept in order. That order was not only about keeping beasts alive, it was about preserving the possibility of a new beginning. So that when the waters receded, the people who walked out were not only survivors, but stewards ready to rebuild. The Ark's internal discipline prepared them for external responsibility. In the same way, whatever season of confinement you face now, whether literal or metaphorical, what you preserve within will shape what you will become when the flood abates. Ask yourself, what in your internal system needs daily tending so you can restart when waters recede? What boundaries must you erect? What routines will protect physical and spiritual health? What relationships need clear, sacrificial leadership and steady care? These questions are practical and spiritual at once. They invite both honest work and humble dependence. The story closes with a small, decisive sign. A bird returns with an olive leaf, and the family walks out into a changed world. That ending is not a guarantee of ease. It is a testimony to preparedness and patience. The Ark teaches that survival without formation is empty. True renewal requires that the inner life be ordered, that leadership be faithful, and that waiting be wise. If you found this deep look at Noah's Ark helpful, share it with someone preparing for a new beginning. Reflect in the comments. What one routine will you start today to protect your internal system? For more videos that bridge ancient stories and everyday leadership, check the description for related resources and watch the next episode.